I'll call the case of Street versus Taylor. First off, if you'll each make announcements, then I think we have possibly some pretrial matters. We'll cover those first.
Good morning, Your Honor.
My name is, let's go plaintiff first, then defense.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Sarah Papantonio, and together with my co-counsel, Ms. Claire Washburn. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt.
Yeah.
You're
the defense, aren't you, Ms. Papantonio?
Say again. It's all, I can't hear. I'm sorry.
You're the defendant, aren't you?
Yes, sir. I apologize.
Well, then we'll let Mr. Littlejohn go first.
Got a little bit confused.
Not a problem.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Kevin Littlejohn II, and I, along with my co-counsel, Ms. Madeline Light, are here today proudly representing the plaintiff, Ms. Jordan Street, as the executor of her daughter's estate, Rory Street. We'd like to bring the court's attention to, we will have a live witness testify, who is Ms. Audrey Saracen.
Right, and then there's a potential for a deposition witness if you choose, is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor, we intend to address it in the pretrial matters procedurally.
Perfect. All right. Ms. Papantonio, now you may introduce yourself.
Sorry, Your Honor, I was a little eager. My name is Sarah Papantonio, and together with my co-counsel, Ms. Claire Washburn, we have the pleasure of representing the defendant in this case, which is Ms. Reese Taylor.
Do you each have pretrial matters?
Yes, Your Honor. Prior to moving into the pretrial matters, we just have a few housekeeping matters to be heard from the court.
Let's, plaintiff, do you have housekeeping matters as well?
Yes, Your Honor, just a few.
Let's do this. We'll just go plaintiff, defendant. We'll just, so you may cover your housekeeping, then we'll go back to the defense.
Okay, thank you. Going back to the deposition testimony we just discussed, we do intend to read the deposition testimony of the mother, Ms. Jordan Street, who's been previously stipulated pursuant to your court order, is unavailable. I would like for my co-counsel to be able to take the stand constructively and read the answers to the relevant questions.
Yes, for any deposition testimony, co-counsel can play the role of the witness and we can go question answer.
Additionally, Your Honor, at the end of the plaintiff's case in chief today, I would also like to read some relevant testimony from our expert witness, which you previously already stipulated as pre-admitted. And I would like to do that at the end of our case in chief, Your Honor.
If you remember and ask to do that, I'll take it up.
Thank you. And lastly, Your Honor, is it okay with Your Honor if I actually do my cross and direct examinations and objections while seated and only stand for my opening statement and closing argument?
Yes, obviously, because of the virtual nature of this, I'm not sure most of us would be able to see whether you're standing or sitting anyway. If you guys want to sit during during crosses and directs, that's perfectly fine. If you want to stand and adjust your video to account for that, that's perfectly all right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Those are my procedural matters. I do have one substantive matter, but if you want to take up defense's procedural matters,
we'll cover that in a minute. Ms. Papantonio?
Yes, Your Honor. Like Mr. Littlejohn, we do intend to publish our expert's testimony as well as the deposition of Jess Merriweather. In addition to that, we intend to admit the toxicology report in this case, which is Exhibit 15. Now, this has been stipulated as authentic and qualifies as a public record under the hearsay exceptions.
Okay, so when you want to offer that during the case, we'll take that up?
Yes, Your Honor. We also have one substantive matter as well.
Let's do this. We will now get away from housekeeping, and you each have a total of 5 minutes for everything. It'll be a total of 10 minutes, 5 per side for any housekeeping. So let's start with the plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor. By way of brief background, this is a wrongful death suit that the mother of Rory Street, Ms. Jordan Street, has filed against Rory's coach, Coach Taylor. We anticipate the evidence today will show that Coach Taylor did not conduct her practice as safe as reasonably possible and actually put Rory directly in harm's way. We anticipate that the defense will try to convince you that Rory was a contributor to her harm by showing that some drugs in her system could have caused her death, which brings us to our first substantive motion and only substantive motion. We ask that this court deem inadmissible any testimony by the trainer Merriweather, of Rory's friends being friends that were smokers and using drugs, as it is barred as inadmissible as propensity character evidence under Federal Rule of Evidence 404.
Response?
Your Honor, we have no intention of getting into that.
All right, well, if you agree, then I will grant that motion as an agreed motion.
Thank you, Your Honor. That's our only substantive matter.
Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. For first and only motion, the defense seeks to exclude any and all mention of Mr. Reese Taylor and why he left his job prior to attending Waco High School. Now, for context, Your Honor, Ms. Taylor had a job at a previous high school where she was coaching soccer. At that job, there was an incident where Ms. Taylor was physical with another one of her students. We ask that you exclude this evidence as it is improper character evidence under 404.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. The federal rules of evidence do allow for character evidence if it's not used for a propensity purpose. We do have a non-propensity purpose for which we intend to use these former acts, which is to show intent. At Coach Reese Taylor's previous job, she engaged in intentional retributive acts by using physical force to punish a player. And that's exactly what happened here today on September 7th, 2018. For that reason, we want to show that she intentionally engaged in those retributive acts then as she did now.
Response?
Your Honor, that's not the proper use of 404B evidence for intent. Now, if you wanted to show evidence of intent, the kind of evidence we would look for is preparation, things leading up that would cause Coach Taylor to form the intent. This is a completely separate issue. It happened months, if not years prior to Coach Taylor's, the event that occurred today. It is completely separated and has no probative matter on the intent that Coach Taylor would have informed on September 7th. They're two completely separate issues. So therefore, the intent argument, because it doesn't go to the issue we're talking about today, it's not proper under 404B.
Your Honor, briefly respond.
Let me ask you a question real quickly. I want you to answer this question.
Yes,
you mentioned intent, and you mentioned that it would be relevant to the intent showing. Isn't that a kind of a backdoor way to say propensity?
No, Your Honor, because what we're showing here today is that Coach Taylor breached the ordinary duty of care. And by him being a defendant opposing this, he's saying that he did not. However, when he did use these physical acts in the past, he left the job in which he was accused of using this physical force. So what we're trying to do today is show that he had the intent to use physical force in the past with previous players, and he engaged in that same conduct here today. Now, opposing counsel mentioned that it's not a plan. A plan is a completely separate, allowable reason under non-propensity purposes. You can use intent, and it's justifiable here.
Here's what I'm going to do, counsel, so we can move on. I am going to tentatively grant that if you believe, because I don't have all the facts before me yet, if the facts come out that you believe it becomes relevant, you can ask to approach. Tell me that you think that the door is open and made it, and then we'll reconsider. But based on what I've heard so far, the argument really seems to be more of not intent, but he did it in the past, and so he could be doing it at the current. And so I want to hear more. So right now it's tentatively granted.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We clear? Okay. Anything pretrial matter from either plaintiff or defense?
With that, we're ready to proceed to opening statements, Your Honor.
Ready to proceed, Your Honor.
All right, let's proceed to opening statements, and I'll call and allow the plaintiff to open either standing or however he feels most comfortable.
I'll stand, Your Honor. Permission to readjust the webcam.
Please do. And tell me when you're ready to start, and I will start the time. You ready?
Ready to proceed, Your Honor.
You may start.
May it please the court. When the public entrusts someone with coaching our student athletes, that coach has the responsibility to make sure her practices are as safe as reasonably possible and not to put our students in harm's way. And despite this, on September 7th, 2018, the defendant, Coach Reese Taylor, chose not to conduct her practices as safe as reasonably possible, and instead chose to put Rory Street directly in harm's way. Judge, This story starts at 3 p.m. on September 7th, 2018. As Rory Taylor and her teammates are gearing up for another scrimmage under the hot 103-degree Waco day. And as the scrimmage is beginning to start, Rory begins to get ready to play the game that she loves. But as soon as the defendant blows the starting whistle, Rory notices something's wrong. She notices that she's having trouble dribbling the soccer ball. She notices that she's not able to field passes that she's normally been able to field. She even notices that she's missing shots that she would normally make. And then she hears the defendant's whistle. The defendant notices too. And then suddenly, Rory hears the defendant yell at her, "Take your sorry butt to Burma Road. You're of no use to me. I am going to run you until you pass out." Rory gathers her things. She heads to the practice field. She does the drills that the defendant tells her to do, but instead of stopping, she's called back to the scrimmage field and is forced to listen as the defendant tells Rory's teammates that they are to go one after another and slide tackle Rory. Rory doesn't complain. She does exactly what the defendant instructs her to do. She stands on the line. She listens as the defendant blows her whistle. She begins to dribble, and in an instant, the first teammate slide tackles into Rory. Rory crumbles to the ground, and before Rory can even stand up on her own, the defendant reaches down, picks her up by her jersey, and says, "Do it again." Rory stands up. She hears the defendant blow her whistle the second time. Rory dribbles, her second teammate comes directly at her. The teammate slide tackles Rory. Rory crumbles to the ground. Again, the coach picks her back up by her jersey, stands her up, "Do it again." And this happens over and over and over again, 15 times. Until on that 15th time, Rory could not stand up. Rory does not hear "Do it again." Just moments later, Your Honor, Rory Street was pronounced dead. Judge, it's the defendant's decision to not conduct her practice as safe as reasonably possible and choose to put Rory directly in harm's way that have brought us here today. Now, this is a negligence action that we brought before you. And what this means is, as the plaintiff, we have the burden of proof. And what we have to do today is bring to you the evidence you will need to convince you that it's more likely than not that the defendant breached the ordinary duty of care that he owed or that she owed to Rory, and that the defendant's breach of that duty of care caused Rory to tragically lose her life. And Your Honor, at the end of the trial here today, we're confident that's exactly what you will find. Now, in order to do this, you'll hear from several witnesses, and as the plaintiff, our witnesses will be presented first. And the first witness you'll hear from is the friend of Rory Street, Miss Audrey Saracen. And you'll learn from Miss Saracen that Rory was a great teammate and a great friend. You'll hear that Miss Saracen heard the defendant tell Rory that she was going to run her until she passed out, and that Aubrey was there as Rory fell to the ground, and that she fell to the ground and passed away during the defendant's drill. And then you'll hear testimony from the mother of Rory Street, Miss Jordan Street. And you'll learn from Miss Street that Rory was a bright and talented young woman who had aspirations of playing Division I soccer. That Rory always had a clean bill of health at the doctor, and that she never thought that when she sent her baby girl to school that day, she would never return home. And then lastly, you'll hear from our expert, Dr. McConaughey. And Dr. McConaughey has over 20 years of experience in the medical field, and you'll learn from Dr. McConaughey that, yes, there were trace amounts of cocaine in Rory's system. But those trace amounts were not the cause of Rory's death. You'll learn that the actual cause was the defendant's decision to subject Rory to those extreme temperatures and have those extreme drills. And then once you hear all that evidence and testimony, Your Honor, our burden will be met. But in an attempt to convince you otherwise, the defense will bring before you their witnesses. And we anticipate you'll hear from Coach Taylor. And no matter what Coach Taylor says here today, she'll have to admit that on September 7th, she was looking for a physical way to punish Rory. You'll learn that Coach Taylor never once used the slide tackle drill that she used to punish Rory. And you'll know that she noticed Rory's performance was off that day as well. And you'll also hear from the deposition testimony of the trainer. But you'll learn from that deposition testimony that the trainer was new to this profession, and that when the drills were taking place, that trainer was yards away, focused on other athletes. And then you may hear from the defendant's expert. And no matter what that expert says, you should know that you'll learn that that expert only has a bachelor's degree in toxicology and couldn't even point to a definite cause of Rory's death. And so, Judge, at the conclusion of all that evidence and testimony, I'm going to come back before you. And I'm going to summarize all the facts and all the evidence you've heard today. And when I do this, I'm going to ask you to return a verdict finding that the defendant is liable. And I'm confident this is something you will do because the evidence today will show that on September 7th, 2018, the defendant chose not to run her practices as safe as reasonably possible, but instead chose to put Rory Street directly into harm's way. Thank you, Your Honor.
Counsel for defense?
Yes, Your Honor.
You
May
ready?
it please the court.
All right.
Counsel. Your Honor. Mr. Littlejohn just said that when the public entrusts someone in a position of power to look after others, that person has to do everything that's reasonably safe to protect them. But what you'll hear is that it's hard to keep a person safe when you don't have all the facts. You don't know what's going on in that person's life. Your Honor, the loss of a child is absolutely horrifying. No parent should have to endure that kind of pain. And as a father, the one question Mr. Street will have is why? Why did this have to happen? And the interesting thing is that in a matter of 3 hours and 2 witnesses, the plaintiff is going to have to ask you to answer that question. Why Rory is no longer with us. And they're going to tell you that it's because of the defendant, Reese Taylor. But what you'll learn is that the why in this case is so much more complicated than what you've already heard. You see, it's the plaintiff's job to answer that question for you because they have the burden in this case. A burden to prove based on a preponderance of the evidence that Coach Taylor was negligent. And they won't do that. Because no one saw this tragedy coming. No one could. Not a close friend, not a concerned mother, and certainly not Coach Taylor. To understand why, we have to go back to the fall of 2018. See, Rory Street, she's a talented high school soccer player. To almost everyone, Rory appears to be a soccer star, a good student, and relatively normal. Yet under the surface, something simmers. Pressure, it builds. The pressure of Coach Taylor constantly asking her to be faster, stronger, better. The pressure of her father constantly telling her to give that scholarship, to play Division I soccer, to go pro. And on top of that, the pressure to even graduate from high school. You'll learn that there's pressure there when she goes to sleep. There's pressure there when she wakes up every day. But the soccer season, it's looming. No one can see Rory's crack. She's too tough. She's a champion. That pressure finds a small crack in Rory's armor, a release. But she's got to keep it a secret. No one can know. No one can find out. And Your Honor, what you'll learn is that no one did find out, not until she passed away. You'll hear evidence today that there was cocaine found in Rory's system when she died, and not a single person, not a close friend, not a concerned father, and certainly not Coach Taylor had any idea. Now, I got to make one thing clear. Rory was a good kid. At no point will we suggest that Rory was a drug addict, not even close. No, Rory was a teenager, one who was looking for a way to feel comfort in chaos. But the reason we have to talk about this cocaine in her system is because you'll learn today how cocaine affects the body, how it makes exhaustion, heat exhaustion, more likely, how it explains why Rory passed out that day. And you'll see that from an expert report. His opinion is that Rory Street's death was caused at least in part by the use of cocaine. You see all of Rory's symptoms on September 7th, unusual paleness, chest pain, groaning, twitching. These are all things that are consistent with cocaine use. And not only that, you'll see an autopsy report, which shows that Rory's heart showed signs of myocarditis, another symptom associated with cocaine use. See, that was all happening at the time in Rory's body at the time that she collapsed, but no one knew. Not her closest friend, not her father, not Coach Taylor. So you've already heard a lot of things about Coach Reese Taylor. And the plaintiff, he's done his job of painting his own version of the events. And from the sound of it, she might not be someone you want to like. But we have to take a step back and talk about Coach Taylor. She's not just a coach, she's a mentor. And like the best of mentors, she sees potential and she pushes. And in the fall of 2018, Coach Taylor saw raw talent in Rory. She'll be described as having almost superhuman ability with the ball. So Coach Taylor pushes Rory, pushes her to perform at the highest level, not just sometimes, but all the time. And this level of skill, it requires discipline. Yet on September 7th, Coach Taylor sees Rory missing easy passes, playing out of a position, missing open goals and shots. So Coach Taylor pushes, unable to see the substance in Rory's body is pushing back, unable to grasp that with every new drill, that substance speeds up the rate of heat stroke, unable to understand why Rory stays quiet. Because no one knew. No one could know. Not her closest friend, not her concerned father, and certainly not Coach Taylor. You see, during this trial, there's going to be some things about Coach Taylor's methods that might not sit well with you. But as you learn, this case doesn't come down to how Coach Taylor disciplined Rory as an athlete. It comes down to what Coach Taylor knew at the time she was pushing Rory to be her best. So as this trial goes on, you have to ask yourself, if Rory's friend didn't foresee the cocaine in her system, if Rory's father didn't foresee cocaine in her system, then how could we expect Coach Taylor to foresee it? How could Coach Taylor know that she wasn't the only force pushing on Rory's body that day? See, if Rory hadn't had cocaine in her system, you have to ask yourself, would Coach Taylor's discipline have resulted in her death? And the science, it's going to tell you no. It'll show you that the risk of death for a heat stroke is only about 3 to 5% rate of death. But when you mix a controlled substance with that kind of heat, that's when it becomes fatal. And at the end of the day, what you'll see is that if her closest friend didn't know, if her father didn't know, or if even Coach didn't know, how was this foreseeable? You see, if any of us had known what was happening in Rory's life, then she would be here with us today. Yet no one could, and no one did. And that's why the evidence will show that this tragic death, no one could see coming. And because of that, we ask that you find Coach Taylor is not liable for it. Thank you.
Bear with me 1 second, counsel.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Counsel, you ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, plaintiff calls is Audrey Saracen to the stand.
Ms. Saracen?
Present.
All right, you have been previously sworn. You may proceed, counsel.
Good afternoon, Ms. Saracen.
Good afternoon.
At any point during this examination, you can't hear me or my connection becomes a little shaky, just let me know and I'll be more than happy to repeat my question. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Now, before we begin, we've had a chance to meet and get to know one another, but if you could please introduce yourself to the judge.
My name is Audrey Saracen.
And Ms. Saracen, why are you here today?
Because I was best friends with Rory, who was killed.
I want to talk a little bit more about what happened around Rory's death, but before we do, let's talk a little bit more about you. Where do you currently live?
In Waco.
Have you always lived here?
Yes, I was born and raised here.
And are you currently in school?
Yes, I go to Waco High. I'm a senior.
And how did you meet Rory?
We just grew up together. I knew Rory since I was a little kid.
And do you currently have any plans after you graduate high school?
Yes, I'm going to study engineering at Rice University.
Will you be playing soccer as well?
I may walk on, but I'm a National Merit Scholar, so my focus is going to be more academic.
Now, I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk more about you and Rory. You mentioned that Rory was playing soccer. Did she love the game of soccer?
Oh, yes, she was a star. Like, she was going to go way farther than any of us.
And what can you tell us about her talent as a player?
Just like I said, she had such raw talent and she was so driven that she just had the passion and was going to play at such a higher level than any of us really aspired to.
And can you describe for us some qualities or skills that would qualify someone as a talented player?
Just fast, nimble, a good shooter, and a good team player.
Who is the coach of your team?
Coach Taylor.
And I want to talk a little bit more about Coach Taylor. What can you tell us about Coach Taylor? Well, before we do that, how long have you played for Coach Taylor?
For 4 years, since I was a freshman.
And can you tell us about the defendant?
Yeah, I mean, Coach Taylor just could get really angry with us.
Objection, improper character evidence. May we approach, Your Honor?
Yes, we may.
Your Honor, I anticipate that this witness is going to go into the fact that Coach Taylor would get angry with her teammates, that she would yell at them, that she would treat them toughly. This is improper character evidence because it goes to show that in the past, if Coach Taylor has treated her team with aggression, that she was going to do it on this day. It's blatant character evidence.
Response?
Your Honor, I'm not asking for blatant character. I'm simply asking what the coach's mindset and attitude was like towards the team. I'm not offering it for propensity purposes. It wouldn't be received as a propensity purpose.
I'm inclined to agree with plaintiff's counsel. However, be very mindful, counsel, how far you try to take this. Generally, just a description overall of the coach and how she conducted is fine. If you start getting further than that, I would expect defense counsel to object, and I would likely then sustain.
Yes, Your Honor.
If you could, please, Ms. Saracen, how was defendant as a coach?
So I've had a lot of coaches, and Coach Taylor is definitely one of the harder coaches like tough love, so to speak, and definitely could kind of had a propensity to fly off the handle sometimes and get angry.
Objection, Your Honor. The very word propensity was used.
I'm going to sustain that last comment. I'm not going to take it into consideration for any count, and I'm going to instruct the witness just to talk about specifically the coach and the description of the coach, and not talk about any propensity or anything like that. Are we all understood on this?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Saracen, were you ever upset by anything that the defendant did to you?
Yes, I was a little annoyed because I was a starting position and I was demoted so that coach's daughter could play in my position.
Now, in your time playing for the defendant, was there anything that you could tell us that he didn't really like that you forced him to do?
I'm sorry, excuse me. He didn't like, could you repeat?
Yeah. In your time playing for the defendant, were there certain things that the defendant would not like for his players to do as far as during practice?
Oh, just be lazy, like not making shots, not participating in the drills and things like that.
And would he be upset if you all would complain to him or her?
Yes, we just kind of did everything we were told because if we didn't, it would tend to just kind of blow up in our faces.
Now, you mentioned that you lost your starting spot on the team. How did that make you feel?
It definitely made me upset, but it's also a good motivating factor. I've been playing soccer my whole life, and I know just as easily as you lose a spot, you can gain it back.
And has that experience with the defendant impacted your ability to tell the truth here today?
Definitely not.
I want to switch gears now and kind of zero in on September 7th, 2018. And I understand it may be difficult for you to revisit that event, so if you need to take your time, feel free to do so. Can you describe what that day was like?
Well, it was a school day, and again, it was in September, so it was pretty just hot, and we'd had school all day, and then we had practice in the afternoon.
Now, you mentioned it was hot, and I want to ask you about the temperature. Your Honor, permission for my co-counsel to publish what's been previously admitted into evidence, Exhibit 21.
Yes.
I apologize, Mr. Littlejohn. Just 1 second.
Take your time.
Counsel, just so you'll know, I've stopped the clock. I'm not penalizing you and running the clock all this technical
Thank you,
difficulty.
Judge. See it now, Ms. Light.
Thank you. I apologize.
Oh, no, you're fine. Ms. Saracen, can you see Exhibit 21?
I can.
And I want to turn to page 2 of that exhibit. Are you seeing this second page?
Yes.
What time do you and your team normally practice?
In the afternoon after school, so, 3-ish is when we'd start.
And can you see on these rows, can you tell us what the temperature was between that 2:51 p.m. all the way up to 6 p.m.?
Yeah, it was at 2:51, it was 100 degrees, and then it got to 103, then 104, then 105 by 5:51 p.m. And then at 6:51, it went back to 101.
Your Honor, permission for my co-counsel to annotate those previously admitted rows. I think you're muted, Your Honor.
Sure.
Please highlight those for us, Ms. Light.
I see they're highlighted.
Thank you. Ms. Light, can you scroll back up to the top of this document one more time, please? Ms. Saracen, what was the date on this weather report?
September 7th, 2018.
And this was the date that you were at practice when you saw Rory
Yes.
fall? Now, was it typical for you all to practice in the afternoon?
It kind of depends as the season went along. Because it is so hot, we often have games and practices later in the evening. And as the season goes on, we moved to the afternoons. But for some reason, we had practice that day in the afternoon.
And is September 7th pretty early on in the season for you all?
Yes, the soccer season starts late August.
And just so we're clear, who's the person that's responsible for calling your practices to order?
Coach Taylor.
Now, can you describe what practice was like that day?
As we already talked about, it was really hot. And we have two fields. We have the field we practice on, and then we have Burma field. And that day, we were running drills on the practice field.
And as you were running drills, what happened?
Well, I can't remember exactly why, but I remember Coach told me to go on Burma because I was being punished for something. And so I was doing the Burma, I don't know what you would call it, drill or punishment. And while other people were running drills. Do you want me to keep going?
Oh, no, you're fine.
Okay.
And once you started running your drills, did Rory ever join you?
Yes. So Rory wasn't having the best practice that day. She was missing shots she normally wouldn't miss, just kind of off. And Coach got really mad and yelled at her, actually, like, go on and take your sorry butt to Burma Road. Like, you're better off, something to the effect of, you're better off just running until you pass out, just because she was just, again, not having her usual practice. So she came and joined me on the Burma field.
Now, can you describe what the Burma drill is like?
Yes. So basically, you run as fast as you can for 30 yards, and then you dribble the ball for 30 yards and have to score the ball into an open net, and then you have to bear crawl 60 yards back, and then you just keep repeating that until Coach says you can stop.
Now, during your time and Rory's time on the Burma run, did she ever tell you to stop and get any water?
Coach, definitely not.
Was there a tent out on the field that you were on?
No.
Any shade at all?
No.
Now, once Rory came to do the Burma run, what happened next?
Well, Rory was struggling. She didn't look right, and she kind of said something to me about how she wasn't feeling well. But I was just trying to help her push through because, again, like I said, we couldn't stop until we were told, and we didn't want to get in any more trouble. I mean, we're already on the Burma Road, so we're in trouble at that point.
Now, did the defendant ever call Rory back to the normal practice field?
Well, she called her back, but not for normal practice because Coach wasn't satisfied with how we were running on Burma Road. And so she ended up calling Rory back for this other drill we hadn't really done before.
Can you describe that drill for us, please?
So basically, Coach had us all line up in front of Rory and run this slide tackle drill. And slide tackles are common in a soccer game. It's basically where you slide towards the player who has the ball. You slide towards their legs to kind of knock the ball away. And so that is a common thing in soccer. However, this drill was a little different because basically we all lined up and ran towards Rory consecutively like 14 or 15 times, like something crazy, over and over again.
Can slide tackles be dangerous?
Definitely. I mean, you're sliding with your full weight at a player's legs.
And while this slide tackle drill is happening, did the defendant do anything to Rory?
So at one point, Rory was really struggling and ended up kind of collapsing, or just after she hit the ground, she couldn't get back up, basically. And coach went over and grabbed her jersey and pulled her back up and just made her keep going.
And during this drill, did the defendant ever offer Rory a break or any water?
No, we were going over and over and over without a break.
Now, can you describe for us what happened during the last person that did the slide tackle?
Well, Rory was just breathing so slowly, breathing heavily and moving so slowly, and was so fatigued. And what ended up happening on the last one was, I mean, she collapsed, couldn't get up, lost consciousness. We all ran over, the trainer ran over, and basically she died right there.
And this was right during the coach's drill?
Yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Hang on one second. You may proceed with cross.
Ms. Saracen, my name's Sarah, and I'm going to be asking you a few questions, okay?
Okay.
Now, you've been playing soccer for quite a while,
Yes.
basically your whole life, right? And you're pretty good.
Yeah.
Played all 4 years of high school.
Yes.
Had a great run, right? You were on the varsity team.
Until coach took me off, but yeah.
Well, in your words, you could have even walked on to a college team if you wanted to, right?
Yeah.
So generally, you have a good idea of what goes into making a good team, right?
I mean, I'm no coach, but yes.
Well, you understand it's not easy. It requires practice.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
At times, it requires discipline.
Yes.
So let's talk about your soccer practices at Waco High School for a minute. Now,
Okay.
soccer season, that starts at the end of the summer.
Yes.
It's hot.
Yes.
Like you just showed us, it was 105 degrees that day.
Correct.
You're born and raised in Waco, Texas, so you're fairly used to the heat, right?
Yeah.
You told us you've been playing soccer your whole life, so you've been playing in that heat for years.
Yes.
And back in September of 2018, the whole team, they'd been practicing in the heat for about a month.
Yes.
And it's fair to say, you know, these practices, they could be tough, right?
Yes.
Coach Taylor, she didn't go easy on y'all.
Yes, she was a hard coach, but nothing like that day.
Right. If you missed a pass or a tackle, you got sent over to this Burma road that you were talking about.
Correct.
And that's a drill where you have to run, dribble, shoot, and crawl back.
Right.
And all these things, they're a part of getting into shape, right?
I don't know about getting in shape. It was a punishment.
Well, I'm not asking if it was a punishment. I'm asking if it was conditioning. Would you agree with that?
No.
Okay. Well, let's talk about it a little bit. You've done Burma Road before, right?
Yes.
Many people on their team have done Burma Road before.
Yes.
And as far as you know, you've never seen anyone pass out from doing Burma Road.
Correct.
Never seen anyone pass out at practice, as far as you know.
Yeah.
And that's because there's times where you need water, right? Would you agree?
Yes.
Especially in that heat.
Yes.
And there are always water bottles available at those practices, right?
Yes, we bring water to practice.
Right. Actually, there are water bottles available to you during break.
If we get a break.
Well, those breaks usually come about every hour. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Sometimes more, sometimes less. It just depends on the practice.
Yes.
And you can't really remember how many water breaks were taken on the September 7th, on the day Rory passed.
At that point, I don't remember any breaks being taken.
Well, you know you got at least one, right?
Yes.
But it could have been more, could have been
Sure.
Okay. Now, when you're not doing Burma Road, when we're not taking water breaks, you're working on technical drills, right? Because that's what makes you better.
Correct.
One of those technical drills is slide tackling.
Yes.
And like you said earlier, slide tackling is just part of the game.
Yes.
Now, earlier on your direct examination, you said that slide tackling can be dangerous, right? But you previously said that it's not usually dangerous.
Yes.
It's physical,
Yes.
but good teams know how to slide tackle.
Correct.
Okay, so now that we kind of talked about what goes into a normal practice, we need to talk about your relationship with Rory, and I apologize if this is hard. But the two of you grew up together.
Yes.
You played soccer your whole lives.
Yes.
You're best friends.
Yes.
I mean, she confided in you.
Yes.
She trusted you.
Yes.
And based on your observations, you understood she was under pressure.
At practice that day, yes.
Pressure to play well,
Yes.
to get a scholarship.
Sure.
And even in a week before Rory passed, Rory had indicated to you that she just wished that she could relax, right?
Yes.
She wished she could be a normal kid.
Yeah, but we were just in that final push. I mean, recruiting gets really stressful.
Absolutely. But a week before this, Rory told you, I wish the soccer season was over at this point.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Your Honor. Oh, excuse me. Go ahead.
Said response.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you. Your Honor, this is a hearsay exception under the state of mind. Rory explicitly said, I wish the soccer season was open. It's a statement of her personal intent, and that therefore it falls under the hearsay exception.
I would overrule the objection. It is state of mind.
Now, let me ask that question again. A week before Rory passed, she said, I wish the soccer season was over.
Yeah, she did, but that's just, I think she was just kind of venting and complaining, and Rory wanted to play soccer forever.
Right. Now, let's talk about Rory, okay? Now, it would surprise you to hear that Rory had tried drugs.
Yeah, I don't think she did.
She never told you about ever experimenting with drugs,
Definitely not.
much less cocaine.
Definitely not.
And if there's cocaine in Rory's system on the day she died, that would have been a shock to you, right?
Yes, I would think it was some kind of mistake.
It would have been unexpected.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I got to talk to you about the day she passed. You remember that day, right?
Yes.
Coach Taylor had sent you to Burma Road.
Yes.
And after Rory was running, she started to struggle.
Yes.
Told you she was feeling funny.
Yeah, she was just tired and not feeling well.
Yeah, she told you her chest hurt.
Yes.
And that too, that was unexpected.
Like I said, I mean, she was just having an off practice, and I just thought maybe, she hadn't eaten or something that day.
Well, it was unexpected to you because Rory, she's tough.
Yes.
She wasn't the type of girl to give in.
No.
She wasn't the type of girl to let on that she wasn't doing well or ask for help.
Well, definitely not at practice with coach, because that would have just made coach angrier.
Right. Well, with soccer in general, you've talked about in your past deposition that one time she played a whole game with a broken, bloodied nose and didn't even complain.
Correct.
Didn't utter one peep about her pain.
Correct.
So you were worried about the pain she was in that moment.
Yes.
And as far as you know, Rory, she didn't tell coach she wasn't feeling well, right?
Definitely not, because it would have made coach angrier.
Well, there's another person on that field, and it was the trainer, right? And as far as you know, she didn't tell the trainer either.
No, because we were on Burma Road.
So based on the conversations you two had, the only people who knew anything about her physical condition were you and her. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I was the one doing it with her. But anyone who came up to her would have seen she didn't look right.
I'm not asking what would happen if anyone came up to her. What I'm asking is, as far as you know, the only two people who knew about her physical condition were you and her.
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Are you erect?
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Saracen, opposing counsel just discussed with you what was normal during your practices with the defendant. Was the slide tackling drill something that was normal?
No, absolutely not. It was something new we did that day.
Was it normal for Rory to be missing passes and missing shots?
No,
Was it normal for her to be looking pale?
no.
And while you were on this field doing the Burma run drill, Rory, was the defendant on the field with you all?
Yes, Coach Taylor was not that far away.
Was he on the Burma run field with you all? Or she on
No, she was kind of yelling from the practice field.
And talking about that slide tackling drill one more time, is it normal for someone to experience 15 slide tackles back to back to back?
No, that's what was strange about it is, yes, a slide tackle is a normal part of a game, but it doesn't happen consecutively 15 times.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor. Permission for the witness to constructively step down from the stand.
Any request for recross?
No, Your Honor. This witness may be excused.
Thank you, ma'am. Call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, I'd like to allow my co-counsel to show us up in the Zoom so we can read the deposition testimony of Jordan Street, the mother.
If your co-counsel would activate her video and her audio.
Good afternoon, Ms. Light.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear me clearly?
I can, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. I want to turn your attention to the deposition of Jordan Street, page 2. Are you there?
I am.
Starting with question 6. Good morning. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Jordan Street.
Line 15. Do you have any children?
I did. My daughter, Rory.
I'm showing you what's been marked as Exhibit 3. Do you recognize this? And Your Honor, permission for Ms. Light to put up Exhibit 3.
All right, permission granted, and I see it's up.
Yes, this is a photograph of Rory.
Is this a fair and accurate depiction of Rory as she appeared to be on September 7th, 2018?
Yes.
What happened to Rory?
She died at soccer practice on September 7th, 2018.
Turning to page 3, line 15. Did Rory participate?
You offering Exhibit 3?
Yes, Your Honor. It's my understanding that Exhibit 3. Yes, Your Honor. Offering Exhibit 3 in the evidence, please.
Any objections to Exhibit 3?
No objections, Your Honor.
Freeze admitted. Sorry about that. But
Oh, good. Thank you, Your Honor. Turning to page 3, line 15. Did Rory participate in any sports?
Yes, she played varsity soccer for the school. She also played soccer for a private traveling club on the weekends. To be honest, that kid's life was pretty much soccer 24/7. Getting her to read a book was the hard part.
Turning to page 4, line 4. Was Rory good?
Oh, Rory was a superb athlete. She had gotten several scholarship offers from Division I programs to play soccer in college. Southern Methodist University, Dallas Baptist University, Austin College, and the University of Texas at Dallas. They had all offered her a scholarship. It was so exciting to think about being able to watch her play at the top level in college against some of the best in the country. Plus, she would have gotten a great education. She had such a bright future, and I was excited to see it all play out.
I want to turn your attention to page 6, line 10. Was Rory a troubled kid?
No, Rory was a good kid.
Turning to page 7, line 8. Did Rory regularly visit her pediatrician?
At least once a year for a physical.
And during any of those yearly physicals, were there any issues?
None. Rory had never had any serious medical issues, just normal kid stuff.
Turning to page 8, line 9. Are slide tackles violent?
They can be. I mean, it's soccer, so a lot of the injuries are pretend acting, but anytime you're running full speed and you slide feet first at another player's legs, that can be a dangerous situation.
Why are they dangerous?
I mean, I just mentioned breaking my leg in college from getting slide tackled. That was only a few minutes ago. Weren't you listening?
Yes, just looking for mechanics here. I'm not really sure what a slide tackle is.
Well, at a very basic level, you could collide with the player and trip them up or knock them to the ground. And again, you're running fast, so that collision can be violent. Also, you're talking about leg-on-leg contact. So there's always a risk for a knee injury or an ankle injury or even a broken bone. Look, I know what some people think about soccer, but it can be a very violent game at times.
Thank you, Ms. Light. That's all I have for the deposition past the witness.
Any cross-examination of this witness at this time by deposition?
Oh, excuse me, Your Honor. I must have been muted. I didn't realize. Yes, I'll just give my co-counsel a moment to get on screen.
Okay.
Claire, you there?
Yes.
Okay, turning court and counsel's attention to page 3, line 1 through 2. Were you at practice that day?
No, I was at work.
On to page 6, lines 18 through 22. Was Rory a discipline problem?
No, not any more than other kids that age. I mean, she was a little wild and liked to have fun, but she wasn't some hippie smoking dope behind the school or some party animal who stayed out all night.
Page 7, lines 5 through 7.
You can't let them get away with being lazy and entitled. You have to keep them in line.
And finally, page 8, lines 5 through 8. Are slide tackles a part of the game of soccer?
Of course they are. Turn on any game and you're going to see players at every level performing slide tackles. That is part of the deal.
With that, Your Honor, that is it.
Any redirect of this witness by deposition?
No, Your Honor.
All right.
At this time, Your Honor, as we previously discussed, pretrial, I would like to take this time before we conclude the plaintiff's case in chief to read some relevant information from our expert testimony from Exhibit 16. It's been pre-admitted.
If you'll bear with me 1 second, let me get to the, which exhibit did you say it is? 14?
Exhibit 16, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, we are at Exhibit 16. You may proceed.
This is the report of Reagan McConaughey, MD, from McLennan County Memorial Hospital. Dear Mr. Dewey, this letter is intended to serve as my expert report in the above referenced matter. Analysis. The major symptoms of heat exhaustion or heat stroke are as follows. Among this list, nausea, vomiting, profuse sweating, seizure. Aubrey Saracen described Rory Street was playing sloppy on the day in question. Once Rory Street was running Burma Road, Aubrey Saracen described her as really struggling and unusually pale. According to Aubrey Saracen, at that point, Rory Street said that she was feeling funny and complained of chest pain. Moments later, when Coach Taylor had Rory line up for the slide tackling drill, Aubrey Saracen described Rory as really pale, like lifeless almost, hands on her hips and breathing heavy. Finally, after the 15th slide tackle, Aubrey Saracen described Rory lying on the ground, groaning and convulsing. Additionally, the description of Rory lying on the ground and convulsing is consistent with a seizure, which is a sign of heat stroke. Based on all the above, it is my opinion, within a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that Rory Street died as a result of heat exhaustion and or a heat stroke on September 8th, 2018. It is also my opinion, with a reasonable degree of medical certainty, that Rory Street's death was not a result of cocaine use. First, Even if there was cocaine use on the day in question, there is no indication that Rory Street was a habitual user of cocaine, as indicated on the autopsy report by the fact that there was no irritation of the throat. Drug tests for cocaine typically have a lower cutoff level between 5 and 150 nanograms per milliliter, with 5 being very low and 150 being high. The amount of cocaine found in Rory Street's system was only 60 nanograms per milliliter, which is a finding consistent with the ingestion of only a nominal amount of cocaine, or that there was a great deal of time between ingestion and testing. Thank you, Your Honor. And with that, Your Honor, this concludes the plaintiff's case in chief.
Your Honor, for purposes of cross-examination, may we cross the expert with a treatise in his field via publication?
I will allow you to show me the treatise.
Yes, Your Honor, it is it is Exhibit 20. And it is page 4 of Exhibit 20.
All right. And you can read to me what you're intending to cross the expert on if the expert was alive.
Generally, exertional heat stroke, which is heat stroke brought on as a result of strenuous exercise or activity, does not result in death. Only 3 to 5% of exertional heat stroke cases result in death each year. Heat exertion and recreational drug use can work together to increase the risk of heat exhaustion and heat stroke. For example, cocaine use can result in hyperthermia, which inhibits the body's natural cooling process by constricting the blood vessels, clamping down on blood flow, and preventing blood from reaching the skin where it can be cooled. Thus, if cocaine use is combined with overexertion in extremely hot conditions, then it would only serve to exacerbate the risks associated with heat exhaustion and heat stroke, and could lead to a cascade of symptoms associated with heat exhaustion and heat stroke.
That concludes your tender from a cross-examination standpoint with a learned treatise?
Yes, Your Honor.
With that being said, Your Honor, that concludes the plaintiff's case in chief.
Okay. Plaintiff has rested their case in chief. Before we start on the defense case in chief, I'm going to calculate and I'll give you a quick time check.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. At this time, my calculations on time is plaintiff has 25 minutes, 15 seconds remaining. Is used just under 30 minutes. Defense has 33 minutes, 30 seconds remaining.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, prior to moving to the defense case, the defense has a motion to be heard outside the presence of any witnesses.
All right, you may make your motion outside the presence of any witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense moves for a judgment as a matter of law. Now, in viewing the evidence in the light most favorable to the non-movement, in this case, it would be the plaintiff. The plaintiff has failed to put forth sufficient evidence such that a reasonable fact finder would find that Rory's death was foreseeable in this case.
Response, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. as opposing counsel just mentioned, in viewing the evidence in the light most favorable to us as the non-moving party, we have in fact provided a legally sufficient evidentiary basis for you to find not only that the defendant breached the ordinary duty of care, but that the defendant's breach did in fact cause the death of Rory Street. We know that when 103-degree temperatures are at play, there's a risk of heat exhaustion. We know that it's not ordinary for there to be a slide tackling drill that allows a player to be tackled 15 times consecutively. And we have the testimony from the friend of Rory Street who was there watching as this was taking place and as the defendant was forcing Rory, who couldn't even stand up, to participate in this drill. And for that reason, we have provided you with a legally sufficient evidentiary basis to conclude that the defendant's actions that day were the cause of the death of Rory Street.
Counsel, you want to respond before I rule, or are you happy?
Your Honor, this is simply a restatement of the facts in this case. It doesn't go to the causation, the foreseeability aspect. What was in Coach Taylor's mind at the time that this was all occurring was not foreseeable because of the cocaine present in the victim, Rory's body. Now, we've put forth evidence to rebut any testimony that cocaine was not an issue in this case. In fact, as to the heat exhaustion and heat stroke argument, we've put forth evidence to suggest that 3 to 5, this only happens in 3 to 5% of cases result in death from heat exhaustion, making this not a foreseeable cause of death. And so with that, we ask that you grant our motion.
I'm going to deny the motion at this time. Any other motions or anything to take up before we start the defendant's case in chief?
No, Your
Nice.
Honor.
Counsel, you may call your first witness.
The defense calls Reese Taylor.
Witness Taylor, good to see you again.
Yes, hello.
You may proceed.
Hi, Ms. Taylor.
Hi,
Please introduce yourself to the judge.
my name is Reese Taylor.
Now, Ms. Taylor, the judge has heard a lot about what happened on that day, so we just need to get right down to business. Are you responsible for Rory Street's death?
No, I'm not.
Did you ever abuse, hurt, or neglect Rory Street?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, now we got to back up and talk about you. Okay, what do you do for a living?
I am a teacher at Waco High, and in my free time, I also coach soccer at Waco High.
How long have you been doing that?
I have been doing that for 6 years. I've been teaching for 6 years, but I've been a coach for over 20 years.
Would you say you're a successful coach at Waco High?
Well, I try to be. We won 5 out of the last 6 years of district. We've won district 5 out of the last 6 years. And we've made it to regional finals twice and made it to semifinals once. So we try to be the best.
So with that record, would it be fair to say that you know how to make a good soccer team?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Yeah.
Tell us what makes a good soccer team.
I think I'd say focus and discipline.
So we've heard a lot about discipline today. Why is discipline important?
Well, without discipline, you don't win soccer games. It's that simple. It's the same as teaching, that if you don't have good discipline, then you're not going to have good students or good players.
So how do you instill this discipline in your teams?
Well, you got to practice. And when players get out of line, with it, and they're not giving their full effort, you've got to make sure that they adhere to the rules. So you have to have discipline.
So what specific drills do you use when players aren't giving their full effort?
We have a few, but Burma Road comes to mind.
What's Burma Road?
Well, Burma Road is a drill where you run 30 yards and then you do 30 yards of dribbling the ball, and then you bear crawl back to the start, or you shoot a goal and then you bear crawl back to the start.
Coach Taylor, is this some kind of drill that you conjured up in your mind for these players?
No, I'm not that creative. It's something that we've been doing since 1990.
Would you say that Burma drill is a punishment? Or excuse me, Burma Road.
Burma Road, it's not a punishment, it's an exercise.
And when you say exercise or drill, what do you mean by that?
It's Soccer involves running for long periods of time. So we need players to be able to run and dribble and shoot for 90 minutes at a time during a game. So you're able to accomplish that type of conditioning in Burma Road.
And when you're playing seasonal games, generally what time of day are these games taking place?
Later in the day, so like 3:15, 3:30.
When do you start practice on a given day?
3:15 or 3:30.
Now, if I went, or any of us went to go watch one of your practices in the fall of 2018, what would we have seen?
Well, when we start practice, we do, I mean, sometimes it depends, but when we start practice, it'll be a full scrimmage, and then we'll do some passing drills, and then maybe some shooting drills, and then some tackling drills.
And as a coach who's constantly looking to be successful, win games, do you keep up with the latest coaching techniques?
I try to be, so yes.
How?
Well, I attend coaching clinics several times throughout the years, and that gives me an opportunity to talk to other coaches about what they're doing. And those coaches come from a high school coaching background, a college coaching background, and sometimes even professional level if they have the time to come talk to us. So I try to keep myself really updated on the current coaching techniques.
Okay, we need a transition and we need to settle something. Talk about slide tackling. Describe what that is.
So slide tackling during a game is one way of retrieving the ball from another player, but we also use it as an exercise during practice to get our players ready for that.
Why is it important to practice that?
Well, it's a really hard tackle, and if it's not done properly during a game, we could be penalized as a team, and that could eventually lead to us losing a game. So we try to practice it during the normal practices.
Now, your slide tackling drill, Rory was the one being slide tackled. Is it out of the ordinary for one player to focus on slide tackling?
No, not at all.
Okay, now, the judge has also heard a lot about this intense heat. You know, it was 105 degrees. Why do you practice in that heat?
Well, conditioning for one, it's very important for our players to keep up during a normal game. So we like to practice in the same type of conditions so that they can play in those conditions during a game.
And with that, are you aware of any rule or any standard that says that soccer teams should not play in 105 degree heat?
I've never heard of that.
And when they're playing in this heat, do you provide water?
Yes.
Now, in 2017, was there any shade, or excuse me, 2018, was there any shade for your players to rest in?
No, there's no trees on a practice field.
Are you aware of any rule or standard that mandates shaded areas?
I've never heard of that.
Now, when you're conducting these practices, you've got, a lot of girls on the field. Are any other adults present at practice?
Yes. No, there are no other adults, just the trainer.
Who's the trainer?
Jess Merriweather.
And does Merriweather attend every practice?
Yes, it's her job to do so.
And what is her role during that practice?
Well, anytime that a player isn't feeling well, they're supposed to, or they even complain to me if they're not feeling well, they'll go over, I send them to Jess, and then Jess will handle it further.
Okay. Now that we understand what those practices look like, I want to talk about why we're here. And I want you to describe the Rory Street that you knew.
Well, she was one of the best players I'd ever coached. She looked to be superhuman at times.
Would you say that you had a healthy coach-player relationship with her?
Absolutely.
And based on what you saw of Rory and the soccer player that you knew her to be, would it be unexpected for her to not listen to you during practice?
Sometimes. Teenage girls are sometimes difficult to coach, but she didn't like hearing criticism sometimes, but I mean, who does?
Yeah, so let's turn your attention then to the day of September 7th on 2018. Do you remember that day?
I do.
So take us through it. What happened? What was happening in practice?
Well, we started with a full scrimmage and we continued on practice like normal.
What was Rory doing?
Well, Oh, I'm sorry. What
Sorry,
did
how was Rory doing?
She wasn't doing great. She looked like she wasn't acting like normal. Sometimes she missed some easy passes, and when she wasn't putting herself in the right positions, and she even missed a few wide open shots on goals. So she wasn't playing in her right form.
So then what did you do?
Well, I told her to go run Burma Road.
Did that help?
Not really. She continued to goof off on Burma Road, and clearly she wasn't listening to the critiques that I was giving her.
We've heard some testimony today that you might have been angry that day. So we got to be honest about that. How did her goofing off make you feel?
It was definitely frustrating.
So if Rory is goofing off, not listening to you, she's not responding to your discipline, she's causing a problem, what do you do then?
Well, I called her over for some slide tackling drills.
And were those slide tackling drills, were they a punishment or were they discipline?
They weren't either. They were just a drill. Or I guess they were discipline, but they were a drill through discipline.
Was this particular drill, was it new to you?
It wasn't new. I mean, we had been doing this. I had done it whenever I was a student, so it's not new at all.
But it is fair to say it's the first time you did it at practice.
Yes, this particular.
But was it out of the ordinary, like you said?
It wasn't out of the ordinary. I had done it for a while.
Okay, and prior to that drill, had Rory come to you saying that she wasn't feeling well?
No, she didn't come to me.
Did she tell you that her chest was hurting?
No.
And during that drill, did she struggle?
Yeah, she did. I helped her up at one time.
But was there any indication that she needed medical attention?
I never saw anything like that.
Now, was Miss Mayweather also present at practice that day?
Yes, she was.
At any point, did she suggest that Rory's health was going south?
No.
Did you see that her health was going south?
No.
And on September 7th, 2018, did you know anything that would indicate to you that Rory Street might have been using cocaine?
No, definitely not.
Did you have any idea that cocaine was pushing on Rory's body at the same time you were pushing her?
No.
No further questions.
Before you start crossing on 1 second.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Coach Taylor. Can you hear me pretty clearly?
Yes.
Any moment during this examination, you lose the ability to hear me, just let me know. I'll be happy to repeat.
Okay, I will.
Now, you just spoke with opposing counsel about your relationship with Rory Street. Now, you were the coach and responsible for that practice on September 7th, 2018, right?
Yes.
And on September 7th, 2018, you decided to hold practice at 3:15, correct?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned that sometimes play games in the afternoon, but really the Texas High School Athletic Association doesn't play afternoon games until it gets cooler, right?
Yes.
And when it gets cooler, it's normally later in the summer, towards the fall, correct?
Yes.
Now, you also mentioned that Rory was a good player. But in your opinion, Rory was more than a good player. Sorry, she was superhuman, right?
Yes, that's exactly what I said.
In fact, you said she was probably the best player on your team, correct?
Probably yes.
But on September 7th, 2018, you noticed that Rory was missing passes.
Yes, she was.
You noticed that despite her being the best player on your team, she was having trouble dribbling the ball.
Yes.
Wasn't hitting wide open shots on goal either, right?
He wasn't hitting those either.
And instead of you asking her what was wrong, you punished her, correct?
I sent her to do an exercise drill.
As a form of discipline, right?
Form of discipline, yes.
And you would agree with me that discipline is synonymous with punishment?
No, because discipline is in order to have players play better, and punishment is coming from a different mindset. So I say that I was disciplining, I wasn't punishing.
And your mindset when you sent her to that field was you were frustrated with her, correct?
I was frustrated with her.
Now, when you sent Rory to this field, on that field, you didn't have a tent, right?
I did not.
You didn't have a person standing on that field with Rory as she was going through the drill.
I think there were other players on the field, but no, not one of our coaching staff.
And you didn't walk over there and ever tell Rory to take a break or get any water, did you?
I did not.
And this was all during the practice in which it was over 100 degrees, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now, as you were watching this practice or this drill happen with Rory, as you called it, you then saw her lollygagging, according to you, right?
Yes.
You thought she was dogging it, according to you.
Yes, she was goofing off.
And at that point, you called her back to the field you were on, right?
Yes.
And when you were on that field, you made her do the drill, the slide tackling drill, correct?
Yes.
And you said that this was a drill that you used to do, correct?
Yes.
Now, you recall giving us a deposition testimony, correct?
Yes.
If you can, please, in your exhibit file, can you please pull up your deposition testimony?
Yes, I can.
And I want you to turn to the back page. And is that your signature on the back page?
Yes, it is.
And you had a chance to review this deposition testimony before we committed it to record, correct?
Yes.
You had a chance to check it for accuracy.
Yes.
Right. And all the way up until trial here today, you had an opportunity to provide us any other relevant information about this case, correct?
Correct.
And I want you to point us to the point in this deposition where you said you participated in a drill where you slide tackled over 15 times.
I'm sorry, Mr. Littlejohn. You wanted me to point to where it is in the deposition?
Objection,
ma'am.
Your Honor. Improper impeachment. May we approach?
Okay.
Your Honor, the question that this witness was presented with or confronted with was, have you ever performed a slide tackle drill? And it was made in the context of throughout your life. Now, the question that was just asked was, where in this file does it say that you performed a slide tackle drill on 15 different times in a row? That was not the question that was being presented. That's simply backdooring in an argument.
Response, counsel?
Yes, Your Honor. On direct examination, the witness said that while this was the first time she had done it with her teammates, she did this slide tackling drill previously in this way. And when she says this slide tackling drill, she has to be talking about the drill that she used on September 7th, 2018. And I'm asking her to point to us where she ever once told us that she had used this drill before or experienced this drill before.
Your Honor, that's simply a mischaracterization of the testimony. The question was, what is slide tackling? And the response was, I've done slide tackling drills before. Now, she wasn't talking specifically about this drill. It was a mischaracterization of what the witness has said.
Your Honor, if I may be heard one more time.
Briefly.
This isn't a mischaracterization. The witness clearly said, while it was the first time she did it with her team, she had done this previously. And this is a proper impeachment by omission. Because we're asking, was this ordinary to do? And if it's something she's never done, it makes it more likely that she was actually negligent.
Counsel, I'm going to ask you to move on. I do believe that the impeachment attempt is something that the way you asked it is different than what the testimony is. I understand where you're coming from as far as what your cross-examination point is, so let's move on.
Now, Coach Taylor, as you mentioned on cross-examination, you had never used this drill with your team before, correct?
Correct.
And so you told Rory to line up across from her teammates, right?
Yes, I did.
And to allow her teammates to slide tackle her over and over again, correct?
Yeah.
And you were the one that is responsible for starting and ending that drill, correct?
1 second, Mr. Littlejohn. It all of a sudden became very loud on my end. Would you mind re-asking the question?
And you are the one that's responsible for starting and ending that drill, correct?
Yes, I am responsible for starting and ending that drill.
And you didn't stop the drill after 5 slackle attempts, correct?
I did not.
You didn't offer Rory any water after 5 slide tackle attempts?
I did not.
You didn't tell Rory to sit under any shade?
I did not.
In fact, you told Rory to do it again, correct?
Yes, I did.
And so Rory did it 5 more times. Now we had 10 slide tackle attempts. You didn't offer Rory any water at that point?
I did not.
You didn't tell Rory to take a break?
I did not.
You told her to do it again, right?
Yes, I did.
And for 10 straight times, you watched Rory get slide tackle and fall to the ground, correct?
Yes.
And as you just said, there were some times when she was weak where you had to help her up.
Yes.
So she wasn't even strong enough at some times to stand up, was she?
She was not.
But you still made her do 5 more slide tackles, correct?
Yes.
You didn't offer any water during those last 5 slide tackles, did you?
I did not.
You didn't tell her to take a break?
No.
In fact, you told her to keep doing it again, right?
Yeah.
And on the 15th time, you couldn't tell her to do it again, could you?
No.
In fact, at the end of your 15th authorization of a slide tackle, Rory collapsed to the ground, correct?
Yes, she did.
During the drill you used for the first time on her, right?
Yes.
During your practice that you are responsible for, correct?
During my practice, yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Hang on 1 second before you, are you going to redirect?
Yes, just briefly.
Just hang on 1 second. All right, you may commence your redirect.
I just want to touch up some things about slide tackling. How long have you been playing soccer?
Most of my life.
And how often, well, let me rephrase that. Is slide tackling a part of normal games?
Yes, it is. Players have to experience it very often during, or they could experience it very often during the game. So we like to practice it too.
And as a coach, is that something that is important to teach your teammates or your team how to perform properly?
Yeah. Yes, it is, because if they don't perform it properly, they could get really hurt.
Now, I want to talk about Rory's condition, because there's no doubt she was struggling. But was there any indication to you that she was physically ill?
No.
And if Jess Merriweather, your trainer, would have approached you and said, Rory's physically ill, what would you have done?
I would have immediately pulled her off the field.
No further questions. May this witness be excused.
Any request for recross for any purpose?
Just briefly, Your Honor. If I may proceed.
Hang on 1 second. You may proceed.
Now, Coach, you said that Rory wasn't physically ill, but you had to help Rory get up time after time during this drill, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
This witness is excused. Let's call your next witness.
That is the conclusion of our live testimony, Your Honor. However, just like plaintiff, we do intend to read into evidence some particular depositions as well as expert reports.
Call your next witness by deposition.
At this time, the defense calls Jess Merriweather by deposition. Miss Merriweather, turning court count, page 8, lines 18 through 24. At any time, did you see Rory stumbling, faltering, or slip?
Counsel,
Yes.
let me tell you when you can start.
Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry.
Okay, tell us line and page again, and you may start.
Page 8, lines 18 through 24. At any time, did you see Rory stumbling, faltering, or slowing down in a way that would have indicated to you that she was in trouble?
No, not at all.
Was Rory sweating hard?
I mean, yes, but everyone was, including me. It was a really hot day.
Page 9, lines 1 through 2. Did Rory ever say anything to you about feeling bad that day?
Nope, never said anything to me.
Page 9, lines 9 through 11. Are players allowed to get water if they want it?
Yes, all they have to do is ask, even if we're not on a water break.
That is the conclusion of our deposition testimony.
Any cross of this witness by deposition?
Yes, Your Honor. Permission for my co-counsel to join me via Zoom to read the relevant portions.
She may.
Ms. Light, can you join us, please?
I am here.
Ms. Light, if you could please turn with me to the deposition of Jess Merriweather.
I have it before me.
One moment, Your Honor. Now, returning to page 7 of the deposition. Are you there, Ms. Light?
I am.
Starting at question 1. Excuse me, Your Honor, I'm having a moment. Apologize, Your Honor.
All right.
Okay. Now, looking at page 2, line 8. Hello there, my name is Jess, or how old are you, Jess?
I'm 28 years old.
And what is your job at Waco High? At line 19.
I'm an athletic trainer and I also teach health.
Line 21. What is the job of an athletic trainer at a high school?
We have various teams and activities at the school that involve some level of physical activity and competition. Everything from football to soccer to volleyball to cheerleading and drill team. As a trainer, I work with the students that participate in those activities to keep them healthy and in shape and to treat any injuries that they have.
Do you attend practices?
Yes, depending on what time of year it is, it may be a football or soccer or something else, but there is always a trainer at any official practice for our various athletic teams.
And turning to page 4, line 2. Who is Coach Taylor?
Coach Taylor is the varsity soccer coach at Waco High.
Have you worked with Coach Taylor?
I have.
In what capacity?
As a trainer, so I've attended soccer practices and soccer games where Coach Taylor was the coach. I've worked with Coach Taylor in order to treat injured player, and I've worked with Coach Taylor just overseeing the students during practices and games.
Do you have any role, or turning to line 12, do you have any role in designing drills for practices?
No, that is all Coach Taylor.
Did you see Rory running, or turning to page 8, line 10?
Page 8.
Yes, Your Honor. Line 10. Did you see Rory running Burma Road?
I saw Rory over on Burma Road, but I wasn't watching her closely.
Line 13. Did you see Rory during a slide tackling drill?
Again, I saw that it was happening and I certainly saw parts of it, but I didn't watch it closely.
What were you doing while all of this was going on?
I was taping another student's ankle about 40 yards away.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right. That concludes the testimony of this witness by deposition. Bear with me 1 minute. Okay, you may call your next witness.
At this time, the defense seeks to publish the toxicology report, which is Exhibit 15, which has not yet been, well, actually, I believe it was pre-admitted in pretrial.
15 is stipulated as authentic, but it has not been pre-admitted.
Okay. Well, we asked to admit and publish.
Any objections to 15?
Yes, Your Honor. While it has been stipulated as authentic, there's still issues with reliability. We don't have the actual person who performed the toxicology before us here today. We don't know who actually actually drew the blood. We aren't able to cross-examine that person. So there are real questions of reliability around the methods in which were used in doing this toxicology report.
Any other objection you want to tender?
No, Your Honor.
Admitted. Exhibit 15 is received and admitted.
At this time, we'll publish.
Exhibit 15, toxicology report. Subject, Rory Street. Toxicology results. Blood specimen. Cocaine, drug. Tested positive in the amount of 60 nanograms per milliliter.
And, excuse me.
Any other evidence or testimony to be offered by the defense?
Yes, finally, Your Honor, we offer Exhibit 18, which has been pre-admitted. That is Spencer London's expert report, and ask permission to publish small portions.
Published to the court. All right, you may, I have Exhibit 18 since it's been pre-admitted. You may direct, if you would, or point the court to whatever you want the court to consider.
Exhibit 18, Spencer London's expert report. Here is the opinion that I have reached in this case, based on a reasonable degree of professional and/or medical certainty. Rory Street's death was caused, at least in part, by the use of cocaine.
Okay.
And with that, Your Honor, the defense rests their case.
Plaintiff, close, or do you have any rebuttal?
No rebuttal, Your Honor. I handed on closing. But if I may just have a brief moment to gather myself for closing.
We're going to give you each about 2 minutes because I've got and I'll give you a time check before we start. So we are, I don't want to say in recess, but we will pause with everybody staying here for about a minute or two to give each of you an opportunity to kind of gather your thoughts. And I'll tell you when we're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, counsel, we are back in session. The evidence is closed and we are ready for arguments to the court. So plaintiff, you may proceed with your initial opening argument.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I proceed, can I please get a time check?
You have, and I appreciate you reminding me because I promised both of you, you have 24 minutes, which I doubt you will use the entirety of, but you certainly may. Defense counsel, you have 18 minutes, 5 seconds.
Your Honor, if I may reserve the remainder of my time for any rebuttal.
Yeah, you don't even have to ask me as long as do you want any type of warning after you've used a certain amount or anything like that?
No, Your Honor, that shouldn't be necessary.
Okay, perfect. You may proceed.
I please the court. When the public entrusts someone with coaching our student athletes, that coach has a responsibility to keep their practices safe and to not put our students in harm's way. And despite this, on September 7th, 2018, the defendant, Coach Reese Taylor, failed to conduct her practices as safe as reasonably possible and put Rory Taylor directly in harm's way. Judge, on September 7th, 2018, as Rory Taylor is noticeably different than she usually is, the defendant sends her to do her Burma run drills. Rory still is unable to keep up, but the defendant doesn't ask her if she's okay. Rory's called back to the scrimmage. the defendant tells Rory she's going to participate in a new drill, a slide tackling drill. Rory has to listen as the defendant tells Rory's teammates that they are to take turns slide tackling Rory, one after the other. And Rory, depending and leaning on the defendant as her coach, does exactly what the defendant says. She stands in front of her teammates and she listens as the defendant blows her whistle. Rory dribbles towards her teammate. Her teammate comes directly at her. The teammate slide tackles her and causes Rory to crumble to the ground. And before Rory can even get back to her feet, the defendant grabs her by her jersey, stands her up, do it again. Rory hears the whistle a second time. Rory dribbles ahead again. Her teammate slide tackles the ball. Rory is forced back to the ground. The defendant grabs Rory by her jersey a second time, pulls her to her feet, and says, do it again. And this happens again and again and again until the 15th slide tackle. The defendant authorizes another player to slide tackle Rory. Rory is sent back to the ground, but this time the defendant can't grab her and pull her up by her jersey. The defendant can't yell again. Instead, Rory lay on the field where she played the game of soccer which she loved, lifeless. Just moments later, Rory was officially pronounced dead. And Your Honor, it was the defendant's decision to have Rory out on that practice field, running those dangerous drills and subjecting her to those types of harm that have brought us here today. Now, as you know, in just a few moments, you'll have to answer a couple questions on the verdict. And I want to walk you through those questions and the evidence you should consider when answering each of them. Now, the first question we'll ask you, was the defendant negligent? And was the defendant's negligence the proximate cause of the injuries that Rory suffered? And Your Honor, the answer to that question is yes, and I want to talk about why. Now, when we break that up into two parts, you have to deal with the negligence, and then you must address the proximate cause. And the law here in Waco tells you that a person is negligent when they don't act with the ordinary care that a reasonable person under the same circumstances would act. Now, negligence is broken up, as you know, Your Honor, between duty and breach. And duty isn't even in contention here today because by the mere fact that the defendant was entrusted as the head coach of Waco High School, she shouldered a duty. She had a duty to make her practices safe, and she had a duty to keep not just Rory, but every other player on that team out of the way of harm. She had to do so as reasonably possible. So when you ask yourself about if there was a duty, you should easily answer yes. But the real question that we've addressed here today is, did the defendant breach that duty? And that's important because the defendant had several opportunities in which she could have done the responsible thing, the right thing, but instead she chose to do something dangerous and irresponsible. First thing, the circumstances of the day. Your Honor, you learned that on September 7th, 2018, it was 104 degrees outside that day. You found out that not even the Texas State High School Athletic Association played their games in the afternoon in the early summer like that. It's because it's dangerous. You learned that while Rory was on that field, there were no tents, there was no shade. Rory wasn't even given an opportunity to take a break. Honor, those are things that make the circumstances unreasonable. The reasonable thing would be to just push practice back 3 hours, to just give your player a break. to just let Rory get in the shade, but instead, the defendant chose to do none of those things and allow Rory to be exposed to these harsh circumstances. And Your Honor, at that point, the defendant breached their duty. But there's much more than just the circumstances. You then turn to the actions of the defendant that day. And when you consider what was done, the Burma drill and this new slide tackling technique, you find out that Rory was told to dribble 30 yards, sprint 30 yards, kick a goal, and then bear crawl 60 yards. Not until she did it 2 times or 1 time, but until the defendant determined that she was satisfied. But after that, Your Honor, the defendant didn't give Rory a break then. She didn't tell Rory to drink any water. She told Rory to come back to the regular practice field because she had another form of discipline she wanted to try out. She told Rory she wanted to do a slide tackling drill. A drill that, yes, we heard, uses a technique that is common to soccer, but not in a way that is common to the game. You learn from Rory's friend, Audrey, that the team was instructed to line up one after the other and slide tackle. You heard the defendant herself had to admit that slide tackles can be dangerous. You found out that while this slide tackling drill was happening, Rory was falling to the ground. And Rory was being picked up by her coach. Your Honor, a reasonable person, a reasonable human being and coach would not subject and should not subject their player to that type of drill under those type of conditions. So the defendant breached her duty there as well. But then lastly, you have to consider what the defendant observed. She observed her star player that she thought was superhuman doing things that were not like her normal athletic performance. You heard that the coach saw that Rory wasn't able to dribble the ball. She saw that she wasn't able to field a pass, saw that she wasn't able to hit an open goal. And instead of asking her star player, is she okay? Do you need to go and see the trainer? Do you need a break? She says, no, you take your sorry butt to Burma Road. I have no use for you. I'm going to run you until you pass out. And Your Honor, as you know, tragically, Rory did much more than pass out. She passed away. And because the student had a duty to protect Rory and to keep her free from harm, but instead chose to expose Rory to those dangerous conditions, actions, and failed to observe how Rory was really feeling, the defendant breached her duty of care. And then lastly, once you realize there was a negligent act, you have to connect that act to the dangerous and deadly consequence. And Your Honor, the law here in Steelton requires that you find the negligence of the defendant be the proximate cause of the injury to Rory. And the proximate cause here in Waco simply states that something is a proximate cause when it is a reasonably foreseeable consequence of the negligence. Now, all day at trial here today, opposing counsel tried to convince you that the time in which Rory passed out was coincidence. I wanted to tell you that somehow being out in a 105-degree day, suffering from heat exhaustion, is just coincidence. They wanted to tell you that not being told to take a water break or sit in the shade is just a coincidence. They try to convince you that participating in a slide tackling drill 15 times in a row where you're falling to the ground and can't even stand up is simply coincidence. And that the real cause was 60 nanograms of a milliliter of cocaine in your system. Your Honor, that cocaine was not the cause. If the defendant had not had Rory out on that field in 105-degree temperature, there would be no death. If the defendant had simply asked Rory what was wrong instead of immediately running to discipline, there would have been no death. If the defendant would not have tried to make a new form of punishment for Rory, there would have been no death. However, Your Honor, we know what the real cause is. We heard evidence from our own expert, Dr. McConaughey, who is the only medical doctor you heard from here today. And Dr. McConaughey your testimony informed you that, yeah, it was actually the heat exhaustion. It was actually being exposed to the high degrees of temperature. It wasn't anything to do with the cocaine. Your Honor, we know that's true. So in turning to the verdict form, when you look at question 1, and you ask yourself, did we prove to you that it's simply more likely than not that Coach Taylor was negligent, and that Coach Taylor's negligent decisions resulted in Rory losing her life? You should feel confident in knowing the answer to that question is yes. And because Coach Taylor is fully responsible for the death of Rory, you will be confident in knowing that she is 100% liable and Rory is not liable at all. Now, in just a few moments, you'll have a chance to fill out this form for yourself. And I'm confident when you do so, you'll return a verdict finding that Coach Taylor is in fact liable. And I'm confident that this is something you will do because the evidence and testimony today has shown that on September 7, 2018, it was actually the defendant who failed to conduct her practice as safe as reasonably possible and instead chose to put Rory Street directly in harm's way. Thank you, Your Honor.
Counsel, before you close, Mr. Littlejohn, I'm going to give you up to 2 minutes for your rebuttal.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, counsel, and you have up to 18 minutes total.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court.
You may proceed.
Counsel. Your Honor. Mr. Littlejohn said it again, that when the public entrusts a coach to look after our youngest generation, that coach has to do everything in their power to prevent and to protect the student, to make sure that they're reasonably safe. But Your Honor, how does a coach protect when they only see half of the picture, when they only have a surface level view? Now, the death of Rory Street, it is a tragedy. No one should have to endure what Mr. Street has endured, and no one blames Mr. Street for trying to find sense in all of this, for asking why. But the why, as we've seen, is so much more complicated than pointing the finger at Coach Taylor. The why is the pressure, looking for an escape in the life of a normal teenage girl, which ended in her tragic death, but due to cocaine. See, if any of us knew what we knew now, none of us would be here. Now, make no mistake, the plaintiff, they understood their burden when they entered into this meeting, understood that they had to prove Coach Taylor, 1, failed to act with ordinary care and was the proximate cause of the tragic death that brings us here today. And it should be clear to you, Judge, that he's failed to do that. Because instead of actually showing you how she caused this, what he did was he flooded your brain with images of Coach Taylor abusing her team. See, he wants you to hate Coach Taylor so you can forget about the holes in their case. See, in this virtual courtroom, there are two competing forces. We've got sympathy on the one hand, we've got the facts on the other hand. And they pull us in opposite directions. And I understand nothing about Coach Taylor makes you want to feel sympathetic. We get that. But when we enter into this courtroom, whether it be by Zoom or a brick and mortar building, we leave our sympathy at the door. You see, in this courtroom, what controls are the facts. And the facts show us that Coach Taylor is not responsible for this. She could not foresee this. So we have to talk about how the plaintiff failed to prove their case. See, the first thing the plaintiff had to prove was that Coach Taylor failed to use ordinary care in her role as coach. And as the charge says, what that means is that what would a reasonable coach have done in the same circumstances? But the plaintiff didn't give you an answer to even the most simple of questions. Didn't give you a standard, a set of rules that coaches has to follow. So how can they say that she failed to act within reasonable care? See, we didn't hear a single person testify as to what coach was supposed to do. So we have to talk about what coach did. See, Coach Taylor, she's a tough love type. There's no question of that. She pushes, she makes them better, she makes them tougher. And she may be tougher than others, but she's committed to helping these students improve. So Coach Taylor didn't deviate from a fundamental ways in which we expect a coach to act. How do we know that though? I can't just tell you, I have to show you. See, she provided water at hot practices. We heard that. And Miss Saracen, she didn't remember how many water breaks they had, but we know they had at least one. And why did she do that? Because while she's demanding, she's reasonable. She does what a reasonable coach does. And what would be unreasonable in these circumstances? What would be unreasonable is withholding water, refusing to take breaks. Did we hear any of that happen on September 7th? No. No, we heard the opposite of that. She allowed them. And that's not all though, because we also talked about how hot it was on that day, that coach should not have been practicing in that heat alone. But is heat alone unreasonable, especially for a sport that's played in the summer? See, the plaintiff, they didn't bring you any evidence to support that. And as we sit here in our air-conditioned rooms, I understand that it's hard to imagine sprinting in 105-degree weather in Texas heat. But for this team, for this player, it's what they're used to. It's what they're conditioned to do. Because if they can't practice in the heat, they can't play in the heat. If they can't play in the heat, they can't win games. See, I imagine on September 7th, Your Honor, if you drove down the road to a neighboring rival school, what would you see? The same time you'd see a team playing in the heat, because that's what you have to do to win. So is practicing in the heat unreasonable? No, it's necessary to have a good soccer team. The plaintiff asked you to look at Coach Taylor's discipline as an evaluation of her deviation. They made a deal about the Burma run, the slide tackling drill, said that this had to be where coach deviated. Yet what evidence did they bring to show that? See, the Burma run's been around for generations, longer than most of us have been alive. Rory's done it, coach has done it, even Rory's father has done it. It's a rite of passage. It's not something that Coach Taylor drew up in a way to torment her players. So you didn't hear any evidence of previous seizures occurring, of previous blackouts, of previous heat exhaustions that would have put coach on notice that this was potentially a dangerous drill. So then we talk about the slide tackling. And I understand how the slide tackling has been portrayed by opposing counsel, but we have to break it down. See, yes, this was the first time that they had done the slide tackling drill in Waco. I understand that. There's no question of that. But we have to consider everything that we heard. See, slide tackling, it's part of the soccer game. It's physical, absolutely. But good soccer teams do that. We heard that from Saracen herself. It's important, but it's not usually dangerous. Now, just because opposing counsel has described slide tackling as resembling Mortal Kombat doesn't make it so. Because if it had been like opposing counsel described, if it had been this physical, terrible contact, then what would we have seen? See, you're going to get the autopsy report from this case. And if it had been as gruesome as opposing counsel described, what would we see on Rory? We would have seen bruises. We would have seen cleat marks. We would have seen indication indications of external wounds. But when you look at that autopsy report, you're not going to see any of that. So, Your Honor, that's the first question that they had to ask, or excuse me, that they had to answer. And already the plaintiff has failed to meet that burden because they didn't answer the question. See, no single person told you that Coach Taylor deviated from the standard of care. Not one. So we have to go further. And I understand, Your Honor, that there's times in this trial where Coach Taylor's methods, they might not have sat with you well. How tough she was, how she disciplines her teams, how she innovates in these slide tackling drills. It's okay, that's fair. But this still doesn't change the fact that they didn't prove that this was a foreseeable cause, that it was a proximate cause of her ultimate death. That Coach Taylor could have foreseen this happening. Because no one foresaw this. No one could see this coming. Not Coach Taylor, not Rory's best friend, not Rory's father. And as you heard today, heat exhaustion, it rarely causes death. We showed you the report that says it only occurs in about 3% of cases. So while opposing counsel goes on about coincidences, how we're suggesting that this is a coincidence, not once have we said this was a coincidence. No, what we have said is that heat exhaustion alone is not, that death from heat exhaustion alone is not foreseeable. But when you mix a controlled substance and you go out and you play in that heat, that's where it becomes fatal. So that means that when Coach was pushing Rory to her limits, the only thing she could expect, there was only a 3% chance that that would have resulted in death. It was highly unlikely. So you might not like the way she was pushing Rory, but in Coach's mind, the worst that could happen was that she could maybe pass out, maybe get sick. That was the worst. That's all she could foresee. But there was something else involved. You saw there was cocaine in Rory's system. And we heard that when you mix that cocaine with the heat, it's no coincidence that death is a natural byproduct. So it was the drugs, it wasn't Coach Taylor, it wasn't Burma Road, it wasn't the slide tackling drill that put Rory in danger. And you have to ask yourself, did Coach Taylor know that Rory was taking drugs? No. Did Rory's mother know that Rory was taking drugs? No. The only silent witness we have to that grim fact is a toxicology report. So if a friend didn't see the cocaine, if a mother didn't see the cocaine, if they didn't understand what was happening in Rory's system, how can we expect Coach to foresee the same thing? The fact is that no one could understand that this tragedy was going to occur because no one had peeled back the layer of the curtain to see how much pressure Rory was facing. The demands of her own potential, the weight of her team's expectations, the demands of a state championship. See, the overwhelming desire just to be a normal kid, just to relax. No one saw the struggle of a normal teenager trying to find out who she was, what she really wanted. So as those pressures mounted, we know now what Rory turned to, that she tried cocaine at least once. And no one blames Rory for trying to find comfort, for looking for a release, for looking for something to support her in that volatile moment. We don't blame her, but we have to use it to look for the truth. And that's where we find it. So you heard the expert testify that her death was caused by, at least in part, by the mixture of cocaine with her normal workout. And that's why when you get this verdict form, when you're asked if Coach is liable for the death of Rory, look to the facts. Ask yourself, if the two most important people in Rory's life, her friend and her father, didn't see this coming, didn't expect it, how could we expect Coach to see it coming? And that's why we ask that you find Coach Taylor's not liable for Rory's death. Thank you.
Counsel, you have up to 2 minutes.
Thank you, Your Honor.
You may proceed.
That's what you have to do to win. That's what opposing counsel just told you, Your Honor. That a practice at 3:15 in the afternoon on September 7th, 2018 was necessary. Even though the games were played in the evening. The grass would have been the same at 7 p.m. The ball would have still went in the goal like it does at 7 p.m. at 3 p.m. The defendant did not have to have his team out there or her team out there on that field to win. And I too am willing to bet that if somehow there was a team that was practicing at 3:15 that day and you drove by that practice, you wouldn't see a slide tackling drill where 15 members of the team consecutively ran into one member until she collapsed to the ground. Your Honor, what happened on September 7th, 2018 was a tragedy. And what the defendant did and her role in causing this tragedy needs to be paid for. Now, the evidence you've heard here today has shown that the decision that the defendant made in not keeping her practice as safe as reasonably possible, but instead allowing Rory to experience the dangerous and deadly drill was the cause of her death. And Your Honor, if you ask the mother of Jordan Street, is 3% to 5% enough for her to make sure her baby girl is protected from the possibilities of heat exhaustion? I'm willing to bet every time the answer will be yes. Fine for the plaintiff, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, with that, this concludes the trial that's received by the court. Court will decide. Everybody will hang out until we know that all of the scoring judges' ballots have been received. They've done their math appropriately, and they don't have to redo something.